And live from the internet, it's
Friday Live.
and today we are very excited to have on our show Jon Worth, EU influencer extraordinaire, specialist in a range of issues from the famous Brexit diagram all the way to transport and the environment. He's been working on policy topics for very, very many years. He's a specialist in the topics I've identified. He particularly likes trains, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. He's also advising the German Green Party and teaches politics in Brussels or in Bruges. So we're very, very happy to have you on the show. Now, you are in France, but you have a very exciting project coming up, which involves traveling around Europe by train. So what is that project? What are you trying to achieve?
Right. So thanks for having me on the show. Essentially, the project is called Crossborder Rail. So #Crossborder Rail. You can find it on Twitter, and there's a dedicated little site about it. And what I'm doing is in a period of 40 days of traveling, starting on 13th of June, I'm going to cross every border in the EU, so interior borders of the EU, not the EU's external borders, that you can cross by train. I'm going to cross every single one of those borders. Now, the problem, of course, is that's the point of the trip, is in many places, trying to cross a border by train doesn't work very well. And in many places, the trains don't run anymore. So I have to take a bicycle with me. And where there are no trains, I'll be cycling across the border. And through that project, crossing all kinds of borders, small connections, sometimes some big intercity connections with high-speed trains, I should be able to tell the stories of what does and doesn't work when you try and cross borders in the EU by train. So there is no pair of countries in the EU that you can cross the border by train that I will be missing in my entire trip.
Now that sounds like an extremely exciting project. My daughter just went on an Interrail trip. We're huge fans of Interrail travel at ZN. We help to promote the Discover EU project. Now, obviously, this is going to be a fascinating trip, but what are you trying to demonstrate? What's the main thing you want to bring attention to?
The first thing is that rail, when you cross a border in the EU, does not work as well as it does within one country. Because if you think of a pair of countries, everyone just assumes that the problem's kind of on the other side, right? So if you think about the border between Belgium and the Netherlands, for example, there are some difficulties and some problems there if you're trying to take a train just across the border from Belgium to Roosendaal in the Netherlands, for example. And the Belgians think, well, that's the Dutch problem. And the Dutch think, well, that's the Belgian problem. And then COVID hits, and the first trains which get cut tend to be the international trains. So all of this effort, which has been done to try to basically get European countries to grow together, that goes out of the window if you want to try and do it by public transport. So to essentially highlight that if you want to rely on the train, it should be as easy to do that if you cross a border than if you do it just within one country. That should also be important if you're doing a business trip. So if you look at the percentage of trips taken by train on routes like Berlin to Frankfurt, for example, the train has a much higher market share than it does on a route like Frankfurt to Paris, which has very much the same sort of trip time. So that's the issue, to basically say, hey, actually, if we're thinking about getting people onto trains, we can't just think about that nationally. We have to think about it internationally. Now, when we drill that down a bit more, then that becomes the question is, what should the European Union do? And that's going to be my effort during the trip, is to highlight that to particularly the European Commissioner for Transport, Adina Vălean. And she is going to receive a literal paper postcard from me every single day of the trip, where everything that is wrong with Europe's cross-border trains on that individual day of the trip will be explained to her, because she might actually like to, or even if she doesn't like to, potentially improve what the European Commission is doing. And it boils down to 4 problems. The first is there are some parts of Europe where there used to be train lines, and for a certain reason, they don't exist anymore, right? They fell into disrepair, or in some places, they even got destroyed as a result of war, or where borders got redrawn. So in some places, you might say, we need a new line, right? The second is sometimes there are lines, but there are no trains, right? So if you take, for example, an issue I've been looking at a lot, which is how to get to Kaunas in Lithuania, which is Europe's capital of culture, you can't get at the moment from Poland to Kaunas in Lithuania by train because there's a track, but there aren't any trains running on it. The third point is often when there is track and there are trains, the railway companies on either side of the border, they don't coordinate their timetables. So you arrive at the border station and the train departing on the other side goes 3 hours later. You get stuck somewhere because the companies don't talk to each other. And if you've mastered all of that, then you've got the fourth problem, which is often as a regular passenger, you can't book through tickets. So basically meaning from where I am at the moment in Bourgogne in France, I can't book a ticket from here all the way to Berlin. I need 2 tickets, one from here to Strasbourg and one from Strasbourg to Berlin, which means if my train from Bourgogne to Strasbourg breaks down and I miss my connecting train onto Germany, I get stuck. Now, if I'm already paying more for my railway ticket to make a trip like that and I have no passenger rights, that's no good. That's no good at all. And so these issues with regard to ticketing and timetabling are another issue which I want to draw attention to during the trip. And I've just been writing on Twitter this morning. I've got big nightmares for planning my trip in both Sweden and Spain, where even though my trip is now only 6 weeks away, I simply don't know whether the trains I need are going to run. Now, just imagine you're a family in Stockholm and you want to go to northern Sweden for a walking holiday with your family, and you want to know, can I even go there 6 weeks from now? And the railway companies, they just can't tell you that, right? Now, railway companies just do not do the basics well. And so those are some of the issues that I wish to highlight over the course of this trip.
Well, that's not, I mean, I think you're going to need more than a postcard to communicate the details of the issue. So I assume that you're gonna be posting those postcards also on Twitter for your followers to find out, so we can follow Jon Worth on his Twitter channel. Now, I want to ask you, you're going to travel all around Europe. Two things. First of all, what is the place you're most looking forward to visit in that phenomenal trip? And the second thing is, which country, in your opinion, has the best train system running?
Okay, I can answer that with 2 birds with 1 stone, with a good and bad example from Austria.
Oh, and the worst, if you want, you can tell us the worst country.
Well, we'll come to bad in a minute, but I think worst has to be Greece, which is basically Greece at the moment has no cross-border rail at all, has 3 cross-border railway lines, one to North Macedonia and 2 to Bulgaria, and no passenger trains run on any of them. So there I have to cross it on the bicycle twice to even get to Greece. Now, the place I'm most looking forward to, and the country I always have the most joy traveling by train, is Austria. And the place I'm most looking forward to visit is a small town in the southeastern corner of Austria called Bad Radkersburg. It's not so far from Graz. Now, this was a town that was divided into 2 parts with the creation of, with the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1919. And then the railway bridge across the Mur River in Bad Radkersburg was destroyed during World War II. And now, with Austria and Slovenia both back in the European Union, then there is a local initiative that wants to rebuild this railway bridge in Bad Radkersburg to mean that the population there will have a railway connection across to the Slovenian side. Now, only 20 kilometers further, you then reach Croatia, and there you have another crazy border absurdity. If you want to take the train from Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, to Budapest, the fastest route routes you through a tiny piece of Croatia. But the trains don't run, because instead the Slovenian railway sends their train round on a crazy long route around so as to avoid having to transit a piece of Croatia. Now, in this day and age, when all of those countries in the European Union, those kind of things are absurd. It should be straightforward for Slovenian railways to be able to send its train through a bit of Croatia and onwards into Hungary, but those things don't work. So that little bit of that border, so Croatia, Slovenia, Austria, and also Hungary is closed. Because of the history and some good examples on the Austrian side and bad examples on the Croatian side, that ought to be one of the most interesting stories of the entire trip.
I'm looking forward to seeing the clips and the photos and the testimonials online. And if we want to follow you, we can go to the hashtag Crossborder Rail, which we're going to put up as a reminder. Yeah,
there'll be a Twitter thread every day from the trip, which will start with a Twitter live video where I'll just basically say, okay, this is what I'm going to be facing today. And outline that, and I'll post as much as I can when I'm on the go. There'll also be some people coming along and joining in for parts of the trip, and then some of the wider political conclusions I'm going to do then in a report after I'm done. And I'm also spending at least 2 hours in every capital city en route, so as to be able to meet activists and organize small events to talk about these issues. I'm also going to be taking along a drone with me to be able to do where to show how bad the infrastructure is at some of these borders. And also, as stated, in the places where there aren't trains, I'm taking a folding bicycle with me, so as I can cycle across the borders to show some of the places where the infrastructure is broken. So it should be quite an interesting multimedia orientated kind of report each day of all of these challenges and all of the difficulties, but also I hope as well some really interesting and fun stories to tell as I go to.
Jon, this is amazing. I love this so much, and it's so true. And I think the reason that people are not taking trains more over airplanes, for example, is not because they don't want to, but just simply because it's not convenient or very expensive or both. For example, from Brussels, you have a train to London. Most people take it as super convenient, and why wouldn't you? You end up straight in the heart of London, and it just trumps a flight. But in very many other cases, if you want to go from the Netherlands to Belgium, it's a good connection. It works quite well. But if you have a discount card in one of the countries, it doesn't work anymore. You have to buy 2 separate tickets, and you run into the problems that you mentioned. And that is a good scenario, really. Belgium and the Netherlands is not one of the worst scenarios across the continent. So I think it's amazing that you're pointing this out, that you're showing us how much there is to improve, rather than what many are doing. Why are people not taking trains? Because those are questions. I mean, as soon as the solutions are there, people will take trains. We see this. We see this as well. You know, people are taking that train because it's just an amazing and fast solution. So thank you for doing that. What do you need from us, the public, to help you amplify those stories?
So what I'm in the planning for at the moment is particularly the events en route. So you can find those on the website of Crossborder Rail, so crossborderrail.trainsforeurope.eu, of where on each day there will be meetings. So I'll be meeting activists and politicians. Now, my own network is quite good in Belgium, Netherlands, France, Germany. But for example, I don't know many people in Lithuania or in northern Greece or in Slovakia, for example. So if you're tuning in to this and you are based in one of those places or know people who are interested in these topics, please do let me know. What's also very important, I've come to also understand, which is exactly your point there, Leora, is the debate and the discussion about railways in Europe is, we all have an idea in mind of some kind of train that we like to take in the past, right? Probably something that got us there fast and in great comfort, but it's the type of thing that goes between big cities, right? So lots of people like very much the French TGV between Paris and Marseille, for example, and it whisks you there in 3 hours. But I want to also highlight those things of like, what is a good train for people in smaller cities, small towns, even villages at borders, but to make sure those people are also connected. Now, it might be actually some of those stories which are most interesting to tell, those type of people who need a train so as they don't get disconnected, to make sure that those places are also, those stories are also told. So therefore, as well, where those places all mapped on the website, if you're based also at one of those borders somewhere, right? If you're on the border between Belgium and Netherlands, between Hamon on the Belgian side and Weert in the Netherlands, there, for example, I'd like to meet some people to say, okay, what's the opportunity here to manage to improve things, and how could that work? So that's my main planning at the moment. Towards the European Union, I think there's another point for those in the Brussels bubble who might be listening in, is the EU doesn't have a full and cohesive answer for what it wants its railway policy to look like. And this is something I want to try to push towards the European Union institutions. The EU plows a lot of money into building new lines, but doesn't do much if trains then don't run on the lines, right? So if we take, for example, a high-speed train connection between Figueras in Catalonia and Perpignan in France, it costs 1.1 billion euros to construct 40 kilometers of line, and that train has two trains a day on it each way, right? throughout the year, just 2 trains a day for such an incredibly good piece of infrastructure. And the European Union says, well, we've built the line, that's job done. It's very important to me as well is that the European Union needs to make sure that actually it's not just the track, but also actually the service that runs on that track that the European Union needs to pay attention to. And so therefore, I'd like to see some changes in the way that our policy works in the EU in that respect as well.
Yeah, I think interestingly, maybe we can build from the Discover EU campaign to kind of, a travel EU or something that would, make this experience of train travel a permanent feature of people traveling from one place to the other, exploring it. We're also very excited because we just got a contract with ETC on promoting European tourism, and of course, a big part of that is people traveling from one country to the other and doing that in a responsible and sustainable way. Now, you're going to start your trip from Brussels at the EU Tweet Up with the Twitter community. So you're hoping to get a lot of selfies to start your journey and to amplify the event?
Somewhat, although it's mostly a word of thanks, actually, because I'm crowdfunding this entire trip, and many of my funders were actually people I know in the Brussels EU bubble. So 13th of June in Brussels is a EU tweet up to basically thank those people and meet those people, and then the day after, I'm actually going to be starting my trip then in Valenciennes on the French-Belgian border, where the EU Agency for Railways is based. And rather amazingly, they don't actually have a train that connects Valenciennes to Brussels. There are 2 kilometers of track at the border which are missing. And so that's going to be the kind of political highlight. It's going to mean I have to take a train into France at 6 in the morning in order to get there. But that will be the kind of, so the social start is at the EU tweet up on the 13th, and then the political start is on the Tuesday, the 14th of June in Valencia.
Fantastic. So we've got a couple of comments. Somebody saying that in Spain, traveling by train is much more expensive than by plane. Gaia said, thank you for doing this, John. And Justin saying that this is one of the things that attracted him to the EU. And that basically, I think it's important to say that, whatever its limitations, there is already quite an impressive infrastructure in place in Europe for train travel. And I think that, one of the things that we were looking at when we were working on Discover EU is how much you can see of Europe by train and what an extraordinary experience it is. Paul Walsh is saying, love the initiative. Will you look at access to trains for people with disabilities?
Yes.
To improve. So a few comments on that. Plane more expensive. Train more expensive than plane. Sorry?
So the question about the point about cost in Spain, if there is one country that makes me mad about European railways, it is Spain. It is a country that has invested in enormous amounts in its infrastructure, but provides very, very few trains on those lines. And that then often means, unless you're really on one of the very important intercity routes, basically Barcelona or Valencia to Madrid, you have the situation, you have only 1 or 2 trains a day, which cost a lot, which makes a lot of financial sense for the railway company, but doesn't make much sense for increasing rail's market share in total. So if you compare that situation in Spain to the situation in Germany, now Germany's got many problems with its infrastructure, but for example, you have 35 trains a day between Berlin and Hamburg, which is massively higher than even on the busiest routes in Spain. So I take that point from the question about why it's so costly. Now, the accessibility issue, and indeed another issue which is often an issue, particularly for tourists, is taking bicycles on trains. The experience in both of those situations is massively varied across the entirety of the EU, from countries like Spain, which make it almost impossible to take a bicycle, but are quite good on disabilities, through to Hungary, which is really good with bicycles, but is awful on disabilities, and some other countries which are in between. Now, what I need, and indeed from the person who posed that question, I know the basics there, but what I'm doing is I'm going to make like a checklist, basically, to say, this train that I've taken here, what can it do? Is it fully disabled accessible? Is it accessible for bicycles? Was it possible to get the information about when this train was going to run ahead of time? All of those types of issues to make sure that I can give an assessment of what does or does not work for each and every train that I take throughout the entire trip. I've got to be able to do that quite fast, however, because this is going to be 150 trains and 27,000 kilometers. So I've got to make sure that I'm doing it as I go, because otherwise I'm going to be forgetting what it was that I was doing on the previous day.
It's amazing your knowledge on the different train situations in all the different countries, but accessibility, I think, is a very big and important topic. I have a friend who's in a wheelchair. There is a solution. This was a while back, but it was a solution in the Netherlands for people in wheelchairs, for someone to come and pick them. Because if you are on one side of the platform was not a problem, you could get there yourself. On the other side, there were stairs, so she couldn't get off. So someone had to come and pick her up, but that would only happen once a day. So sometimes she had to wait for 4 hours for someone to lift her off the platform if she came from another direction. It's just insanity. Like, you can imagine why anyone would want to take a train if they had a choice of doing something else, because you're just standing there on the platform waiting for hours for someone to physically lift you down the stairs. Those kind of shocking situations, really.
But bear in mind that on many lines in Europe, every single passenger has got to wait 6 hours, right? I have here in Neuilly-sur-Ravière, the local town here, right? There is a gap in the middle of the day of more than 4 hours without a train. Right?
No, but this was her coming from work. This was her just coming from work, from Rotterdam to Delft. You know, it's a train that runs 4 times an hour, and there was just nothing. She just had to wait there because she couldn't get down the stairs. You see what I mean? There was no issue with the train.
But coming down to the other point, so it's very, very important that there is one central technical problem with regard to accessibility of trains in Europe, and that is the height of the platform. That might sound like an absurd situation, but basically, the most accessible trains are where you can roll with a wheelchair directly off the platform straight into the train. The problem is there are 2 standard platform heights in different parts of Europe of either 55 centimeters or 76 centimeters. Now, designing a train which has step-free access from both of the heights is really a mess. Now, there's been a big fight EU-wide over all these years to try to basically standardize that, right? But at the very same time as, for example, France and Switzerland are going for 55, Germany's going for 76, and that then means that you have a cross-border problem that when your train crosses to the other side, you then again need a ramp when you get to the other side. Now, the European Union ought to take decisive action there to standardize that Europe-wide, but then the railways say, sorry, that's going to cost us too much money, and then progress doesn't happen. So it would be eminently solvable. This is the situation with railways in general. None of these problems are technically too difficult, but in terms of implementation are costly and are slow. But you need to take the right political decision first, and then everything else would need to flow from that. Now, the difficulty is at the moment, in my view, we haven't even got the right political decisions before we even get to the quality or not of the implementation.
Well, I think that, the first step is always to bring attention to the issues. And actually, Daniel confirmed what you just said, that he's traveling this evening from Brussels to Barcelona. From Barcelona to Valencia. And he's seen some of the problems that you're talking about. Gaia's looking forward to seeing what is the situation in Italy compared to the rest of the EU, because she's based there.
I have Italy's a complicated mix, right? I think the Naples, Rome, Florence, Bologna, Milano, Torino route is the best high-speed train there is, or high-speed route there is in Europe. It's impeccably good. It has 2 operators. Competition between them has driven down prices. The service pattern is very regular, and it's really, really good. The difficulty is many of the regional trains in other parts of Italy, and notably anything further south than Naples, have really suffered. And so therefore, you've got this tension between what should you invest in? A lot of the money in Italy is being plowed into those high-speed connections to the detriment of regional services. It's been the same in France as well. Now, Germany or Austria take a very different take on those issues, where they've tended to say, we're going to improve the speed a bit, but we're going to make sure that those smaller towns and smaller cities still have a comparatively good connection. Now, I tend to favor that kind of Austrian or German approach. I think that serves more passengers better than the focus on high-speed trains that there is in Italy, somewhat, or in Spain, or in France. But yeah, it's a very valid question. I'm sure I'll have a brilliant time on the Rome to Milano Centrale train, but that doesn't mean that that rail in Italy is generally good. But nevertheless, the high-speed rail in Italy, it costs 40% only of the cost per kilometer than the Thalys does between Brussels and Paris, right? So comparatively, if you compare Brussels-Paris to Milan-Rome is much, much better than Brussels-Paris is.
Yeah. So Daniel saying very interesting insights. Guy is saying, to be fair, we're making improvements. I think your insights are incredibly detailed. Clearly, your grasp of this issue goes very deep. So we're very much looking forward to following your journey, meeting you first on the 13th of June in Brussels before you leave. I hope we'll be able to see on a map like all the stops you're making in a dynamic little dot of John going across 27,000
It will be
miles,
GPS
kilometers.
tracking as well.
Okay, so that's going to be fabulous. So I believe that's all we have time for today, but it was really interesting. We will stay close to this and keep track with you. So thank you very much. Have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you online and on the rails. Bye.
Thanks a lot, John. Bye guys.